school field trip to a museum. Now, museums and 8-year-olds are kind of a funny mix, and I think that's because we're like tiny, hypercritical art experts who really don't hold back. For us, the hierarchy was very clear. Gift shop first, then maybe the cafeteria, and then after that, who cares? Why look at portraits of guys in funny hats when you could be inspecting a glow-in-the-dark dinosaur pencil sharpener? No contest. But then came the field trip. You probably know the type. The important museum with a capital I, where everything, including the air, feels like it's judging your life choices, and your teachers have to shush you every 30 seconds. I was in my usual field trip mode, mentally planning my escape while doing just enough interested kid face to avoid trouble. And then we walked into the room. Now, this room was different. It kind of felt like it was auditioning for a role in a Christopher Nolan movie. You know, dim lights, dramatic spotlight, the whole we take ourselves very seriously vibe. And in the center, what were they showcasing? Pieces of paper. I couldn't even pretend to care when I first walked in. I was probably thinking about what I was going to have for lunch. But then what happened was that the guide started talking, and slowly, things got interesting. He explained that these were all letters from the 19th and 20th centuries, which, mind you, still was not enough to interest me. But these weren't your average, "Dear Mom, camp is great" letters. These were messages written under the rule of oppressive regimes all around the world, smuggled out of prisons or passed between families like precious jewels, each one carrying whispers of freedom, each one risking everything just to exist. You know that feeling when something clicks in your mind and suddenly a particular entity looks completely different? That's what happened to me in that room. Now, I probably didn't know what censorship exactly meant at that point in time, but what I did know was that those letters were extremely real, extremely human, some of them kind of painful to read, and paradoxically, they became fascinating. And as time went on, I had another one of those moments. Censorship wasn't just this bad thing that kept people silent. It was something that had forced these writers to be braver, more creative, and somehow more human. But here's what blows my mind now, and this is what I want to talk about today. Censorship might be one of the best things that ever happened to literature. Now, before you start throwing things at me, let me explain. I love to read, and one interesting thing I've learned by looking into the historical context of some of the novels I've devoured is that for all its darkness, censorship has this incredible way of lighting fire, especially in writing and works of literature. It's like putting a lid on a pot of boiling water. The pressure doesn't stop the steam, it just forces it to find new ways to escape. And I have so many favorite examples of this. Take George Orwell. It's 1948, the world is still shaking from totalitarianism, and direct criticism could get you killed. So what does he do? He gives us talking pigs and a place called Room 101. He creates a world so powerful that even today, when someone says Big Brother, you don't necessarily think of family reunions. Orwell didn't just imagine this world. He lived parts of it, reporting from the Spanish Civil War, watching truth bend under the weight of propaganda. The very forces trying to silence him gave him his most powerful voice. And he isn't alone. Consider Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a Kenyan writer who dared to critique colonialism and post-independence corruption. When his play, I Will Marry When I Want, rattled the political establishment, he was thrown into prison. So what did he do? Did he stop writing? No. He drafted a novel on toilet paper. That novel, Devil on the Cross, written in Gikuyu instead of English, was a revolutionary act. Ngugi wasn't just speaking against censorship. He was reclaiming his cultural identity in the process. And isn't that the ultimate irony? Censorship often forces writers to be more subversive, more original, and ultimately, more impactful. That's why I find this so fascinating, because suppression has this incredible way of lighting a fire under storytellers and creatives. It creates this epic David and Goliath dynamic, you know, the storyteller versus the regime, the artist versus the system. And against all odds, the artist often wins. Also, constraints breed innovation. Have you ever tried to bake a cake without sugar? You start getting creative real quick. Writing under censorship is exactly like that, except instead of sugar, you're missing freedom. And somehow, you end up creating something even richer, even more meaningful. Now, there are so many other visionaries like this throughout history who have exercised creativity in constraint. Authors like Voltaire, who wrote Candide under the strict eyes of the French monarchy, had to be smart about how they criticized the ruling class. Instead of penning direct attacks, they cloaked their critiques in satire and wit. And let's not forget how the Bible, that staple of Western culture, was once banned in its entirety in some regions for its controversial ideas about power, love, and morality. But the act of censorship didn't destroy the Bible, it fueled its mystique, igniting debates and discussions, and eventually revolutionizing religious and philosophical thought. Now, I can see some of you thinking, that's great, but I'm not Orwell or Ngugi. And you're right, most of us aren't. But here's the thing. Censorship isn't just about governments and prison cells anymore. It's that social media post that gets buried by the algorithm. It's that teacher who says your essay topic is too controversial. Sometimes it's even that tiny voice in the back of your head whispering, my story doesn't matter. The question isn't whether we'll face censorship. It's how we'll respond to it when we do. Will we let it silence us, or will we, like those letters, find a way to push through? I left the museum with a lot more than a stuffed toy that day. I left with this, a realization that when the world tries to silence you, it's not the end of your story. It's just the beginning. So that's my challenge to you. The next time you feel steamrollered, remember this. Our greatest stories often aren't born despite the constraints we face, but because of them. Thank you.